In this video, we're going to talk about arrays. And an array is really just a whole bunch of something. So you might have heard of an array of solar panels, which is just one solar panel after another. Or we could talk about on a street an array of houses, just one house right after another. So it's really just a whole bunch of items. And we haven't been able to deal with a lot of data in our programs. We've kept track of variables like an integer to keep track of someone's age. But what if we're renting out our apartment on Airbnb? We might not just have one guest, we might have 5 different guests. So we're going to need 5 different integers to keep track of them. And even with 5 people, that's not great, but it would work. Let's say we have 100 people coming over the course of the summer, or we're a Dominican university and we're keeping track of 4,000 students. The system isn't going to scale very well. Every time we get a new guest, we don't want to have to rewrite our program with a new variable. Every time Dominican gets a new student, we don't want to have to rewrite all the software that keeps track of people. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to put all that information into one variable. And an array is something that can keep track of a whole bunch of one type of information. So in this case, a whole bunch of ints all go together in the same variable. And then we refer to them by number. So the variable is called guest ages. And we can say, well, what is the int at spot 0? That's 19. Or what is the int at spot 3? That's 7. In Java, like with most programming languages, the first item in an array is item at spot 0, and then we count up from there. So how can we use these integers? Well, if we might have printed out guest1 age, we say system.out.print guest ages and then 0 inside square brackets. So that's saying go to the guest ages array and get the thing that's at spot 0. If we want to change something, instead of saying guest2 age equals 22, we'd say guest ages at spot 1 equals 22. So once we've created the array, the ints inside the array work almost exactly the same as a normal int would. We can use them to display things, we can change them. We just refer to them a little differently. We say guest ages at spot 0 or guest ages at spot 1. So this gives you a little sense of how we can use an array, but let's talk about how we actually create the array. How does this guest ages variable start? So with a normal integer, we would write something like int guest age equals 3. With an array, we do almost the exact same thing. Instead of being an int, we add square brackets to the end to say it's not just a single int, it's an array of integers. And then instead of saying it's equal to 3, the value of one integer, we've got to say, well, it's equal to a new integer array of size 5. And that will create a new array. It's not really blank, but we'll pretend it is for now, that can hold 5 integers inside of it. And then let's fill the array. Guest ages at spot 0 is 19, guest ages at spot 1 is 21, and so on, puts the appropriate information into the array. So now we've got this guest ages variable, and we've got it filled up with data. Right now, though, you may be asking, how is this any better than using 5 separate variables? We haven't really saved ourselves any work. We won't this week, but next week when we talk about loading information from files, we'll see how we can load the information into the array. And even if there's 5 or 100 or 5,000 pieces of information in the file, it'll just take a few lines of code to get that information loaded into the array. So this will get simpler next week. But this week we'll talk about how to use the array and how to make it much simpler. So let's say we wanted to print out all the ages onto the screen. Normally we would have to write out all 5 ages in separate print lines. Using an array, we can use a for loop. So I can say I want to start at 0, and go until spot 4. I is less than 5, not less than or equal to. So we'll continue this for 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we'll say I want to print out the age at spot I. So let's actually see this in action. We start at the first line, and we say I is equal to 0. That's essentially saying this time through the for loop, I'm going to be talking about the item at spot 0. So we double check 0 is less than 5, and then when we print out guest ages at spot 0, we're going to print out 19. And we'll go back and we'll add 1 to I. I is 1. Now we're talking about the item at spot 1 in our array. And so 1 is less than 5. We go and we print out what's the guest age at spot I. What's the guest age at spot 1? And we'll add 1 to I again, and now we're talking about the item at spot 2. And 2 is less than 5. We're going to print it out. Now we'll talk about the item at spot 3. 3 is less than 5. We'll print it out. Now we're talking about the item at spot 4. 4 is less than 5, so we'll print that item out again. And lastly, we'll add 1 to I. I becomes 5. There is no item at spot 5. That's beyond the length of our array, but that's fine. 5 less than 5 is no longer true. We're going to continue running our program. So these 3 lines of code are going to print out our array. And what's great about this is the only thing we need to change if our array is size 100 or our array is size 1 million is we just need to change I is less than 5 to whatever the size of our array is. And in fact, there's an easy way to do this. Instead of writing 5 in here, that's kind of a magic number that's not great, we can actually use guessages.length. So every array has a .length as a part of it. That'll tell us how big the array is. If our array is size 5, that'll be 5. If our array is size 4,000, that'll be 4,000. Arrays can become really powerful when we combine them with classes. So I've created a guest class here so that we're not just keeping track of the age, we're keeping track of the name and the phone number, or really any other information we want about our guest. To create that array, just like on the left where we said I want an array of ints, on the right we'll say I want an array of guest objects. Just like on the left we say it should be an array of size 5, on the right we'll do the same thing. On the left we'll say the age of the person at spot 0 is 19. Now we're working with guest objects, so we'll say, well, at spot 0 it should be a new guest, and we'll give the appropriate information to the constructor to create a new guest to put at spot 0. So let's look at our main method here. We're doing exactly that. We're creating the guest array. We're putting guests at spot 0 through 4. And then we can just print out the information. I created a little display info method that will return a string to display on the screen. If we run this, we'll have exactly what we want. It'll display the first guest's name and then their age. We don't display their phone number in this method. And so you're seeing here, creating the guests is complicated. We'll simplify that with files later. But once we've got an array of guests, this code will display the guest's information whether there are 2 guests or 2,000 guests. This same 3 lines of code will do it perfectly. One new error we might run into, we've created an array of size 5, which means 0 through 4 are valid indices. We can put any number 0 through 4 in these square brackets. But what happens if we put a number outside of that? I'm going to create a new guest here at spot 5, and I'll just copy and paste the information here. What will happen now is when we try to put something at spot 5, there isn't a spot 5, and so we're going to get a java.lang array index out of bounds exception. And it even tells us what the index was. So the valid indices are 0 through 4. We tried to use index 5. And it'll tell us very nicely the spot here. Another reason this happens a lot is if we accidentally put less than or equal to here. So we should be going 0 to 4. This will go 0 to 5. We'll have the exact same error when we try to print out the name of a guest who's not here. And it actually gets buried a little bit here, but it'll tell us now at this line inside the for loop, I tried to use an index of 5. And it might be a little confusing as to why that's happening, but the debugger could help us step through and see how did I get up to 5 if we don't spot it immediately.